Ric Flair is picking his top 10 favorite wrestlers to fight, but his list changes every single time. One year a guy is his best friend, the next year he is gone. So why can't the Nature Boy make up his mind? Stick around to the end to see the final list. And if you love wrestling drama, hit that subscribe button. Ric Flair is the best ever. That is what everyone says. Now Flair is naming the 10 wrestlers he really liked fighting in the ring. But there is a big problem. Flair always changes his mind. His lists are different every time he talks. One year he loves someone, the next year that same person is not even named, and it causes fights everywhere. So why does Flair keep changing his list? Why can't the Nature Boy just pick 10 names and stay with them? Because even when experts try to make his final list, they find a long past of opposite ideas and changing feelings. Flair's memory moves like water. It changes based on who he is angry with, who he is friends with, and what story he wants to tell that day. Let us look into this mess. Ric Flair is a legend. Nobody argues that point. His career lasted 5 decades. He worked in Jim Crockett shows. He worked in World Championship Wrestling. He worked in the World Wrestling Federation and World Wrestling Entertainment. He even worked in Total Non-Stop Action Wrestling. That is a lot of years. That is a lot of matches. That is a lot of partners and opponents. But getting a steady top 10 list from Flair, that is not possible. People have tried for years. Fans argue about it all the time. Wrestling historians study it like old books. And they all came up with something called the consensus. 9. These are 9 wrestlers. Almost everyone agrees Flair loved working with. The problem is the 10th spot. That spot keeps changing, and Flair himself will not fix it. The consensus 9 comes from decades of talks, podcasts, and public statements. These 9 names show up again and again. They stand for different parts of Flair's career. Some are from his early days in the NWA areas. Some are from his best years in the late 1980s. Some are from his later times in WWF and WCW. But even with these 9 locked in, Flair still finds ways to change the list. Sometimes Flair talks about these wrestlers and leaves half of them out. Sometimes he brings up totally different names, and that creates the main opposite idea. If he loved working with these men so much, why does the list keep changing? Why does Flair change his stories based on his mood? In 2024, something odd happened. Flair gave a talk where he named his favorite past wrestlers. He said Ricky Steamboat. He said Sting, but then he added Wahoo McDaniel, Blackjack Mulligan, and Bruiser Brody. These are area guys from the 1970s and early 1980s. They are tough, physical wrestlers who worked the NWA system when it was harsh and hard. This change matters. For years, Flair talked about famous stars and technical masters. Now all at once he is raising up the old area veterans. This creates tension with the stable. Consensus 9. It goes against decades of earlier claims, and it shows a growing pattern of change that gets worse as Flair gets older. Flair's list changes based on the time he is thinking about, the talk he is doing, and his mood that day. When he focuses on NWA area history, he stresses mind games and physical toughness. When he talks about WWF and WCW famous years, he stresses drawing power and mass appeal. When he talks about pure in-ring work, he focuses on technical skill and chemistry. These are 3 totally different measures, and Flair jumps between them without warning. This makes getting a final answer almost not possible, but experts tried anyway. They looked at every talk, every podcast, every public statement. They checked Flair's words across decades, and they found the names that appear most often with the highest praise. The result is a list of 10 wrestlers that balances Flair's career-long chemistry, his clear professional praise, and historical meaning. But before we show that list, we need to understand what Flair really means when he says he liked working with someone, because Flair uses different terms that sound alike but mean very different things. Sometimes Flair talks about his greatest rivalries. This means long-running fights that drew money and created strong stories. These rivalries put box office success and story impact first. They are about making fans care and selling tickets. Sometimes Flair talks about the best workers or greatest in-ring performers. This is pure technical rating. It is about athletic skill, execution, and wrestling skill. It is fair measurement of who could perform moves cleanly and safely. Sometimes Flair talks about who he liked working with. This is different from both rivalries and technical skill. This is about chemistry. It is about reliability. It is about how easy it was to produce a great match with that person. This measure favors specialists who could go the distance in long matches. The question asks specially about who Flair liked working with. That means chemistry and work rate matter most. It puts working together over show. And that difference is key for understanding the final list. So now let us go through the 10 wrestlers Flair liked working with most. But we are not just celebrating them. We are going to show the opposite ideas, the drama, and the tension that surrounds each name. Because with Flair, nothing is ever simple. Number 1, Shawn Michaels. Flair called Shawn Michaels the greatest in-ring wrestler and worker of all time. That is the highest praise Flair has ever given anyone. Michaels performed at WrestleMania 24 in Flair's emotional retirement match. It was a perfect ending to Flair's WWE career. The match had drama, storytelling, and technical excellence. Fans remember it as one of the best retirement matches ever. But here's the problem. When Flair gives shorter lists of his favorite wrestlers, he often leaves Michaels out completely. In that 2024 talk where he named Steamboat, Sting, Wahoo, Mulligan, and Brody, Michaels was not named at all, not even once. So Flair says Michaels is the best ever, but then forgets to include him when listing favorites. That does not make sense. This opposite idea shows how Flair's list changes based on what story he wants to tell. When he is talking about pure technical skill, Michaels is number 1. When he is remembering his roots and area days, Michaels disappears. The praise is real, but it is not steady, and that change creates doubt about everything Flair says. Number 2, Barry Windham. Flair again and again called Barry Windham one of his all-time favorite opponents. They wrestled long matches that lasted 60 minutes. Sometimes they went 90 minutes. These were hard technical classics that tested both men's strength and skill. Windham could work at a high level for long times without slowing down. That is rare. That is special. Flair praised Windham clearly and specially. He said Windham was one of the best he ever worked with. But then Flair leaves him out of lists all the time. Windham gets forgotten for bigger names with more famous recognition, even though Flair calls him an all-time favorite. Windham often does not make the cut when Flair says names fast. This shows another pattern. Flair's public lists often favor star power over real chemistry. Windham was a worker's worker. He was not a huge famous star like Hulk Hogan, so when Flair is talking to a general audience, he skips Windham. But when he is talking to hardcore wrestling fans, Windham gets raised up. The opposite idea shows Flair changes his answers based on who is listening. Number 3, Arn Anderson. Arn Anderson was Flair's most trusted partner in the Four Horsemen. They had total professional trust. Anderson's ring mind games were perfect. Their singles match at Fall Brawl, 1995, was an emotional classic after Anderson turned on Flair. It proved how much respect and trust existed between them. Anderson could sell a story like nobody else, but Flair's relationship with Anderson has been complex. They have had fallouts. They have had public tension. In some talks, Flair hardly says Anderson. In others, he raises him to legendary status. The 1995 fight added real-life strain to their partnership, and later, conflicts made things worse. This shows how Flair's personal relationships change his lists. When he is on good terms with someone, they get praised all the time. When there is tension, they get played down or ignored. Anderson is without a doubt one of Flair's greatest partners. But Flair's changing praise shows that personal anger changes his historical memory. He rewrites the past based on present feelings. Number 4, Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan was the biggest draw in wrestling history. Flair versus Hogan was the dream match of the 1980s. When they finally wrestled each other right, it created massive interest. Hogan could get a crowd reaction like almost nobody else. Flair said he had a great run with Hulk, but Flair added a condition. He said the run was great when they were allowed to wrestle each other. That suggests something held them back. Maybe it was booking. Maybe it was Hogan's control over his matches. Flair's quiet criticism means their chemistry was not natural. It was great when forced to be great, but not naturally excellent. This opposite idea shows Flair's complex feelings about Hogan. He respects the star power and the drawing ability, but he does not fully accept Hogan as a pure in-ring worker. When Flair talks about technical excellence, Hogan often gets left out. When he talks about drawing money, Hogan moves to the top. The change shows Flair's inner conflict about whether show matters more than skill. Number 5, Randy Savage. Randy Savage fought with Flair in both WWF and WCW. Their matches were high quality and compelling. Savage gave steady performances and created major fan interest. The chemistry was real and produced memorable moments across multiple groups. But Flair sometimes frames these fights around himself. He centers the story on his own performance rather than the partnership. In some retellings, Savage becomes a supporting actor in Flair's story instead of an equal part. This changes how Flair shows Savage's importance based on the talk. The opposite idea shows Flair's pride changing his memory. When he wants to stress his own greatness, partners get made smaller. When he wants to show thanks, those same partners get raised up. Savage's place on the list is safe, but how Flair talks about him changes all the time. That change creates doubt about the truth of the praise. Number 6, Terry Funk. Terry Funk's fight with Flair in 1989 was legendary. Funk pile drove Flair through a table. They had brutal matches, including a famous I Quit match at Clash of the Champions. The force and new ideas left a lasting mark. It was one of Flair's most important fights outside of title programs. But Flair's praise for Funk changes a lot. Sometimes Funk is prominently featured in Flair's stories. Other times he hardly gets named. When Flair changes to talking about his modern likes or area roots, Funk gets overshadowed. The change suggests Flair's emotional link to the fight changes, based on his current mindset. This pattern shows how Flair's storytelling likes change over time. In the 1990s and 2000s, he talked about Funk all the time. Now in the 2020s, he has moved on to raising different names. Funk's historical importance is without a doubt, but Flair's modern retellings do not always show that importance. The opposite idea shows how Flair rewrites history to match his current story goals. Number 7, Harley Race. Harley Race was more than an opponent. He was a teacher figure. Their match at Starrcade 1983 officially made Flair the NWA World Champion and the standard holder for the company. Race's realness moved to Flair through that win. It was a career-making moment, but Flair sometimes raises other teachers and opponents over Race. Based on the talk, Race might be shown as the most important person in his career, or just one of several important veterans. The changing stress shows how Flair changes history based on situation. When Flair wants to stress his area roots, Race gets massive praise. When he wants to focus on later famous success, Race gets less attention. The opposite idea shows that even Flair's most basic relationships get reframed based on what story he is telling. Race's importance should be fixed, but Flair treats it as variable. Number 8, Sting. Sting had the longest professional relationship with Flair. They worked together from Sting's start through the final days of WCW. Their dynamic was the emotional backbone of that company for 2 decades. Flair clearly credited himself with raising Sting's career, just as earlier teachers raised him. But Flair's mentions of Sting are wildly unsteady. In some talks, Sting is shown as vital and key. In others, Flair hardly talks about him. When Flair focuses on other times or other opponents, Sting sometimes disappears completely from the conversation. This is shocking given how long they worked together. The opposite idea suggests Flair's personal feelings about OCW and its legacy change how he talks about Sting. When he is bitter about WCW, Sting gets less praise. When he is nostalgic, Sting gets raised up. This shows how Flair's feelings color his historical memory. Sting should be a constant in every list, but he is not. That shows deep change in how Flair processes his own career. Number 9, Dusty Rhodes. Dusty Rhodes was Flair's greatest rival. Their fight defined the NWA in the 1980s, as Rhodes was the common man good guy fighting against Flair's rich bad guy. The chemistry was perfect. The stories were compelling. Flair said he had great chemistry with Dusty and great runs across multiple years. But Flair's retelling sometimes plays down Dusty. Based on the talk, Flair might stress other opponents instead. When he wants to focus on technical workers, Dusty gets pushed aside because he was not known for pure wrestling skill. When he wants to talk about drawing power, Dusty comes back to the front. This opposite idea shows Flair values different qualities at different times. Roads should be a permanent part of every conversation about Flair's career, but Flair's changing measures mean even his most important rival gets unsteady treatment. The pattern shows that Flair does not have a fixed understanding of his own history. He remakes it every time he tells a story. Number 10, Ricky Steamboat. Ricky Steamboat is the gold standard for Flair's in-ring work. Flair again and again said, Steamboat's talent and their great potential together. Their 1989 series of matches is seen as a technical benchmark for the whole business. It shows Flair at his absolute best. The matches are studied by wrestlers and fans as perfect examples of storytelling and execution, but even Steamboat gets left out sometimes. In that 2024 talk, Flair said Steamboat, but then quickly changed focus to the area veterans like Wahoo McDaniel and Bruiser Brody. When Flair stresses physical toughness over technical excellence, Steamboat's importance gets made smaller. This final opposite idea is the most damaging. If Flair cannot steadily raise the one opponent everyone agrees shows his best work, then nothing he says can be trusted. Steamboat should be untouchable in Flair's mind. But even that relationship gets reframed based on what story Flair wants to tell. Flair can name his 10 favorite wrestlers, but the answer you get depends on when you ask, how you ask, and what mood he is in that day. The Nature Boy is still working everyone, even himself. The game never ends. The opposite ideas never stop. So who do you think should be on Flair's final list? Did he leave out your favorite? Let us know your top 10 in the comments. And don't forget to like and share this with a fellow wrestling fan.